Hey man, we were chilling with the group tonight, having a little bit of a chat, still concerning Pokemon Go and the advances we seek to make with the company Niantic, who has given us this smash hit right off the bat. Making a ton of money, I suppose. I would not be surprised with how many people are fluent in microtransactions these days and providing a good inventory that makes purchases worthwhile. I do see the merit thus far of not being able to purchase Stardust or candies, but I feel like that is a foolish option. I do think we should expand the ability to trade amongst players to create our own economy, and there are many games that have created a structure therefore. I mean, Pokemon is one of them. The global trading system made the game a little bit more interesting. However, I do think a game like RuneScape, which has the ability to deal in its own markets, is worthwhile in looking to in the future. Now, for the meantime, I represent Team Instinct. You know, I'm a 27-year-old fan. My kids are fans. I've been playing since the, handhelds first came out, man. My first experience with Pokemon Red definitely led to a long journey of conquering multiple games on each generation of handheld console, as well as the games on N64, the games on GameCube, the games on the Wii U and the Wii. Over the years, my life has been impacted in many ways by the franchise, man, in a good way, of course. And, there's a lot of smack being talked on Pokemon Go players right now and the fan base in general, but, I feel like nobody who's playing lets that get them down. That just sort of slides right off. Like, if you would say that to me, you're not worth having the conversation about why I like Pokemon and my history with Pokemon, because, you don't really care. If you're talking that kind of smack, I don't really rate you as worthy of the debate. But honestly, we have been developing, interestingly enough, we only just now came to find that there is a company developing an iteration of the Pokemon franchise titled Pokemon Convergence, where we have been developing for probably since 2010, late 2010, a free-running story which coincidentally just happened to be the absolute best imagination of Pokemon for a mature audience that one could ever have hoped for if you're part of the fan base, myself included. And I'm just proud that, it was our idea, but it's called Pokemon The Convergence. And I mean, I did not think to Google it any time lately to see if there was a project with a similar name, but I would be so happy to stack the Convergence versus Convergence and see which one fans like better. Because if you gave me 30 minutes of your time, I'd be happy to describe the entire 4 to 5 arc possibility if we look at animated series, if we look at, ongoing manga that really capture the world in terms of popularity and the market and massive fan bases across the globe. I do feel like the Convergence could stand up to any anime. The Convergence could stand up to any manga, any video game, any movie, any television series. That, I don't know, honestly, what kind of audience the Pokemon cartoon draws on a regular basis. But, if Pokemon The Convergence dropped on Adult Swim, I could dwarf that audience 10, 15, 20, 100 times over. Guaranteed. Anybody that likes Pokemon would like to watch The Convergence because you gave us the tools. As soon as Pokemon Origins came out, I realized that the potential there was infinite because we were hoping and keeping our eyes out on different animation studios over the years producing some of our favorite animes and weighing which style and which hand would lend best to telling a story that could span over 100 episodes with absolutely no filler, and with a dynamite impact, an incredible score, beautiful characters, the hands-down best storyline you could ask for from the franchise, aiming at an adult audience, aiming at a cognitive audience maybe above the age of like 10, 12, 15. I mean, it is so easy to try to make an adult Pokemon a mature, dark, Nolan-style Pokemon show by throwing in tons of blood and gore and sexualizing characters and, just throwing in a cuss word everywhere you feel possible. But it doesn't pan out that way. It's better done tastefully. And tastefully happened to provide us, like I said, with just an amazing amount of content based off a conflict which involves the entirety of the Pokemon universe. Keeping with the theme of having massively impactful fates in the balance, huge powers at conflict with one another, but the antagonist is perfect. The conflict and the overtone is absolutely perfect to take advantage of the wide world of Pokemon, to take advantage of the anime culture as to the personalities provided that ring out with fans, the familiar aspect of the people you want to see in an anime story. Not superhumans, but humans living alongside their Pokemon counterparts, which, we have over 700 now. And so many regions, so many tastes, and so many cultures existing in one franchise, in one series, that we can take advantage of in an incredibly efficient way by making certain aspects hyper-realistic. Like the connection between Pokemon and humanity spans across a huge spectrum. And I mean, you know that in a very general sense as a fan, but more so, you can almost feel the possibilities for all of these, fantasy creatures from originally a kid's series and the true power and possibility they brought when connected to the personality and really, in an essence, dominance of a human being. Where for 20 years now, you've been able to hook us and keep pulling us in between the cards, between the games and the shows and the movies. And the rise of Pokemon in the anime world with Origins, I am so surprised that did not just... Well, I understand why. It wasn't a series. It was a mini-series. And it just smashed in terms of looking good, of incorporating the old and the new together, bringing it all into one beautiful portrait. And the Convergence could do that in an absolute die-hard, kick-ass way by making the world a little bit more in touch with what we're familiar with in actuality, which, the rest of the world is acknowledged at points in the Pokemon universe, but to make it an actuality that the Western Hemisphere exists, not just to bring America into it in a contemporary sense, but to look into the past of Pokemon, not from a standpoint of creation and the fabric of reality, but mankind's relationship with one another and Pokemon's relationship to mankind. So if everyone develops as this whole world ecosystem to use Pokemon in the creation of civilization and as partners with mankind, and also food sources and, playing a role in industry and commerce, agriculture, and all of the subsectors that becomes a thing to draw on as part of creative imagination. And looking back into mankind's relationship across the globe, between cultures, and thinking that, okay, so about 150 years ago, the West became entirely embroiled in a industrial era stance of civilization in a huge civil war amongst the entire Western Hemisphere. And when Japan and its outlying islands, in the Pokeverse context, became involved in this war, it shook up the whole world because there was just an absolute devastation. There was absolute carnage across the world with this war. And in the end, there was a great movement of people. And I believe that allows for multiple ethnicities and backgrounds to be represented in the characters possibly being in the story, and adding for a variety of colors and flair that are explained by the past of the world. And in the end moments of this war, after these mass exoduses and people essentially saying, let's move on with our lives, none of this was worth it, the West and the East as whole communities decided we'll just never see each other again, and that'll be for the best. And Unova, being a large island nation off separated by a few hundred miles of water from Japan proper in the mainland, which I have drawn to include the 4 mainland regions and Kalos, far in the north, separated geographically from Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh. There was a lot of people that just said, no, we're just done talking to each other. Like, Unova essentially tried to invade mainland Japan while mainland Japan was honoring its alliances with key Western nations. And so the breakoff became the Pan-American Union was the one giant civilization that came together out of the ashes of the Western Hemisphere. And Unova was sort of exiled and excommunicated from mainland Japan, and they never spoke again. And so about 150 years passes since this time, and these civilizations evolve quite separately. And what's beautiful is that the antagonist, being a single malevolent force of unknown origin for many parts and the vast majority of the story, pulling strings behind everywhere, about 20 years ago invaded Kalos, who was separated from the 4 regions, which is the main focus of the story as far as what we cover in the invasions to come. But Kalos is manipulated. The legendary Pokemon of Kalos are manipulated to causing the Pokemon populations of Kalos to become feral and to leave their human partners, and in some cases masters and overseers, and return to a primal state. And the ensuing chaos of massive hundreds of millions of Pokemon turning feral in Kalos based on a more realistic population. The human population is quickly overrun, and those Pokemon are manipulated into pooling psychic energy from that type to opening portals across the Pan-American Union, across the sea, and spilling massive feral savage hordes out into the unsuspecting areas amongst the Pan-American Union. And the massacre of the invasion is a very heavy toll in the case of the Pan-American Union. And they, in the end, develop mechanical weapons and firearms much more strongly than they do in relying on their Pokemon, which just cannot handle the sheer brute force of the invasion. And they end up using Pokemon as straight-up slaves in terms of, food sources and labor sources. And the rest are pretty much left as a buffer shield as the weapons are developed and distributed in time to defeat the onslaught. Now we fast forward, and they do end up defeating, but they never find out what happened or where it came from. And they don't necessarily suspect the East. That comes into play about midway through the entire story. In an amazing, epic way, I should say. But the focus of the convergence as a story is the same thing enveloping as we already have the tone set for Unova in the story of Team Plasma, as this malevolent force moves on to Unova now and uses Team Plasma's initiative and also corrupting the legendaries of Unova to the same end it did in Kalos, in making the feralization of Pokemon rampant, as it already is under the influence of Team Plasma. But in this story, Trainer Black/White fails and is killed by the sages, by Ghetsis, and by N. And N is therefore also killed when he realizes the true measure of the sages' plan for this feralization. And as this develops, Unova is overrun by feralization. Team Plasma is protected and builds up its forces. And when this invasion takes place across the 4 mainland regions, it is the response of the single military organization that has for generations run as the standing army for all of the 4 regions united, as 150 years has brought them together against the savage onslaught of totally alien Pokemon. That means that for 150 years, nobody's seen a Pokemon from Unova. And that makes this all the more blunt when these savage aliens start pouring from portals, and the story of all the characters we've come to know and love, and their losses, their fights, and their adventures and victories and battles in this war. and I think this could be super clutch.